The funeral flowers were still fresh when my half-sister Stella handed me the eviction notice. I was standing in the kitchen where my father had taught me to make his famous Sunday pancakes, still wearing the black dress from his burial just 3 hours before, when she slid the legal document across the marble counter like it was a restaurant check. "You have 48 hours," Stella said, not even looking up from her phone. Her manicured nails clicked against the screen as she scrolled through what looked like real estate listings. "The house needs to be cleared for the estate sale." I stared at the paper. Eviction. The word felt foreign in my mouth, like speaking a language I'd never learned. This wasn't just any house. This was the 2-story colonial where I'd grown up, where my father had carried me on his shoulders through these same hallways, where I'd spent the last 2 years caring for him as cancer slowly stole his strength. "Stella, this is my home too," I whispered, my voice barely audible of the hum of the refrigerator that still held his leftover medications in neat rows. Dad said a lot of things when he was medicated. She cut me off, finally looking up with those cold blue eyes that never seemed to hold warmth, even as children. "But the will is clear. Everything goes to me, the house, the business, his savings account. You're not even mentioned." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not mentioned. After everything. After dropping out of college to care for him, when his first heart attack left him weak. After spending my 20s managing his doctor appointments, instead of building my own life. After holding his hand through chemotherapy sessions, while Stella was building her marketing career in New York, too busy to visit. I picked up the document with shaking hands. The legal language blurred together, but certain phrases stood out like neon signs in the darkness. Sole beneficiary, Stella Marie Patterson. All assets, properties, and holdings. This can't be right, I said more to myself than to her. I took care of him. I was here every single day for 2 years. You visited maybe 6 times. Stella sighed dramatically, the sound she'd perfected in high school when teachers asked her about missing homework. "Deanna, you need to understand something about men like our father. They appreciate loyalty, but they value success more. I built something with my life. I have a career, an apartment in Manhattan, a future. She gestured vaguely at me, at my simple black dress that I'd bought at Target, at my unpainted nails and the exhaustion that had settled permanently under my eyes. You chose to be a caregiver. That was your choice. The cruelty of it took my breath away. As if loving someone enough to sacrifice for them was a character flaw. As if the sleepless nights when he couldn't breathe properly, the careful monitoring of medications, the gentle encouragement when he lost hope, as if all of that meant nothing compared to a corner office and a business card with impressive titles. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, the reality of my situation finally sinking in. I had exactly $80.47 in my checking account. My savings had been depleted over the past 2 years. Spent on his care when insurance fell short, on organic groceries that might tempt his failing appetite, on little comforts that made his final months bearable. "That's not really my problem," Stella said, but her tone had shifted slightly, a note of what might have been discomfort creeping in. "Look, I'm not heartless. I'll give you a week instead of 48 hours, and you can take some of his personal items. Nothing valuable obviously, but photos, books, that sort of thing." She stood up, smoothing down her expensive black suit. Even in grief, Stella looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled in a low bun. Her makeup flawless despite the tears she'd shed so dramatically at the funeral. I wondered, not for the first time, if those tears had been real. "I have to get back to the city," she continued, checking her watch. "A Cartier that probably cost more than I'd spent on groceries in 6 months. I have meetings tomorrow. The estate lawyer will be in touch about the paperwork." She paused at the kitchen doorway, the same doorway where my father used to lean when he'd call us for dinner. Back when we were a family that ate meals together. "Deanna," she said, and for a moment I thought I heard something softer in her voice. "I know this is hard. But you're 27 years old. You can't live in his shadow forever. Maybe this is the push you need to finally grow up." Then she was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of her expensive perfume, and the sound of her heels clicking against the hardwood floors that my father had installed himself when I was 12. I stood alone in the kitchen, holding an eviction notice for the only home I'd ever known, and tried to make sense of how everything had gone so wrong so fast. The next morning, I woke up in my childhood bedroom for what I now knew would be one of the last times. The walls were still painted the soft yellow my father had chosen when I turned 16, saying it reminded him of sunshine. Stella had always called it juvenile, but I'd never wanted to change it. Now I wondered if she'd paint over it before the estate sale. Erasing one more piece of the life we'd built here, I made coffee in the quiet kitchen, using the chipped mug that read, "World's Best Dad," that I'd given him for Father's Day when I was 8. Everything felt different now, tinged with the knowledge that it was temporary. That someone else would soon stand in this exact spot, maybe replacing the coffee maker that still worked perfectly, maybe ripping out the small herb garden by the window where we'd grown basil and rosemary together. I had 6 days to pack up 27 years of life. 6 days to figure out where to go and how to start over with less than $1,000, and no clear job prospects. I'd put my life on hold so completely that I wasn't even sure what skills I had anymore, besides administering medications and advocating with insurance companies. I started with my father's study, thinking it would be the easiest room. Just books and papers, mostly, nothing Stella would want, the real valuables, his watch collection, the antique desk, the expensive electronics, those would stay for her. But going through his things felt like performing surgery on my own heart. Every item told a story. The reading glasses he'd worn to help me with homework. The small notebook, where he'd tracked my school plays and soccer games. Every achievement carefully noted in his neat handwriting. The stained copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that he'd read to me when I was sick with pneumonia at age 9, doing different voices for all the characters. In the bottom drawer of his desk, beneath insurance policies and tax returns, I found a manila folder labeled, Deanna's Future. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings of every small achievement from my childhood. Honor roll certificates, a photo from the local paper when I'd won the middle school science fair. Even the article about my high school graduation where I'd been salutatorian. At the bottom was a handwritten note dated just 6 months ago, in his increasingly shaky handwriting. Deanna sacrificed everything for me. She deserves better than what I can give her now. I pray she finds her way to happiness. I cried then, really cried. For the first time since his death. Not the polite, controlled tears from the funeral, but raw, ugly sobs that shook my entire body. He had seen my sacrifice. He had understood what I'd given up. So why had he left everything to Stella? It took me 2 hours to compose myself enough to continue packing. I worked methodically, creating piles. Things to donate, things to throw away, and a small collection of items I couldn't bear to leave behind. A photo of the 3 of us from my high school graduation. Back when my mother was still alive, and we looked like a real family. His favorite cookbook, the one with food stains and margin notes in his careful script. The small wooden jewelry box he'd made for me in his workshop when I turned 13, before arthritis made woodworking too difficult. I was wrapping the jewelry box in newspaper when I noticed something odd. It was heavier than I remembered. I'd kept it on my dresser for years, but mostly as decoration. I didn't own much jewelry worth storing. Now, examining it more carefully, I realized the weight was distributed unevenly, as if something was hidden inside the base. My father had been good with his hands, skilled at creating secret compartments and hidden features in his woodworking projects. He'd built a bookshelf with a hidden panel, where my mother used to hide Christmas presents, and a coffee table with a compartment, where he kept important documents. I turned the jewelry box upside down and ran my fingers along the bottom. There, a small section that felt different, slightly raised. I pressed gently and heard a soft click. A panel slid open, revealing a small compartment I'd never known existed. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, and beneath it, something that made my heart stop. A photograph I'd never seen before. My father and a woman who wasn't my mother, standing in front of what looked like a bank building. They were both smiling, dressed in clothes that suggested the photo was taken in the 1990s, probably around the time I was born. I unfolded the paper with shaking hands. It was a handwritten note in my father's distinctive script, dated just 3 months ago. My dearest Diana, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've found what I hoped you would find. I couldn't tell you while I was alive, because I wasn't sure you'd understand. But I need you to know that you were never forgotten, never unloved, never less important than anyone else in this family. My vision blurred as I continued reading. The woman in this photograph is Elena Vasquez. She was more than a friend to me. Though we never married, because I couldn't bear to complicate your life when you were young, and still healing from your mother's death. Elena understood my situation and never pressured me for more than I could give. But she gave me something precious, hope for your future. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in my father's handwriting, were a series of numbers, an account number, a bank name, and Elena's phone number. The letter continued, Elena works at First National Trust. 23 years ago, when you were 4 years old, she helped me set up something special. A fund that would grow over time, adding to it whenever I could, sometimes just $50, sometimes more. It was for you, always for you. For your education, for your future. For the life I wanted you to have, but couldn't give you while I was alive without creating questions and complications. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the paper steady. The account is in your name, but it required my death to become accessible. I know that sounds dramatic, but I wanted to ensure that you would have it when you needed it most. When I was no longer here to take care of you, Elena has been the trustee all these years, watching over it, making sure it grew safely. I had to sit down on my bed. The same bed where he'd read me stories, where he'd brought me soup when I was sick. Where we'd planned my future in those optimistic conversations we'd had before cancer stole his energy for dreaming. I couldn't put this in my will, because I knew Stella would find a way to contest it. She's always been clever with legal matters, and she has resources I never had. But this account exists outside of probate, set up long before I ever got sick, long before anyone could question my mental state or claim I was being manipulated. The amount at the bottom of the page made me gasp aloud. $247. Nearly 23 years of careful savings, modest investments, and the kind of patient planning that spoke to a love I'd never known existed. Elena will explain everything. She's been waiting for this day, though like me, she hoped it wouldn't come so soon. Call her. Trust her. She knew you before you knew yourself. And she's been protecting your future all these years. I sat in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by boxes of memories I was being forced to abandon. Holding proof that my father had loved me more than I'd ever imagined. But more than that, I was holding the key to a completely different future than the one Stella had planned for me. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers and dialed Elena's number. She answered on the second ring, as if she'd been waiting for my call. Deanna. Her voice was warm, with a slight accent that sounded like home even though I'd never heard it before. You knew, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You knew he was gone, yes, Mija. I've been waiting for you to find his letter. I was starting to worry that maybe he hadn't had time to leave it where you'd find it. I don't understand, I said, though part of me was beginning to. The will, everything went to Stella, he didn't mention me at all. Elena's laugh was gentle but knowing. Oh Diana, that will was a decoy. Your father was smarter than anyone gave him credit for, especially that sister of yours. She got the house and his business accounts, because he wanted her to have something, but the real inheritance, the one that matters, that was always meant for you. But why didn't he tell me? All these years. I could have known. Because you would have argued with him about the sacrifices he was making. You would have told him to keep the money, to spend it on himself, to enjoy his life. You have your mother's heart, Diana. Too generous for your own good sometimes. He needed you to have this money when you were truly alone, when you had no other options. So you couldn't give it away or talk him out of giving it to you. I closed my eyes, picturing my father lying in his hospital bed, during those final weeks. Sometimes rambling about things that didn't make sense, other times startlingly lucid. Had he been thinking about this secret the whole time? Had he been protecting me even as I thought I was protecting him? What do I need to do? I asked. Can you come to the bank tomorrow morning? First National Trust on Main Street. Ask for me specifically, Elena Vasquez. Bring identification and that letter. We'll take care of everything else. That night, I barely slept. I kept reading and reading the letter. Studying the photograph, trying to reconcile this secret life my father had maintained with the man I thought I knew. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. His insistence that I focus on school instead of getting a job in high school. His refusal to let me contribute to household expenses, even when money was clearly tight. His mysterious optimism during those final months, even when the prognosis was grim. "You're going to be okay, Diana," he'd told me just weeks before he died. Better than okay. "You're going to have choices I never had." I thought he was delirious from the pain medication. Now I realized he was making me a promise. The next morning, I dressed carefully in my one good business suit, navy blue, purchased for a job interview I'd never attended because his health crisis had intervened. I drove to First National Trust in his old Honda Civic, the car that would probably be sold along with everything else in the estate sale. Elena was waiting for me in the lobby, and I recognized her immediately from the photograph, though she was older now, her dark hair streaked with silver, and her face lined with the kind of wrinkles that come from decades of genuine smiles. She embraced me like I was a daughter she hadn't seen in years. "You look just like him," she said, holding me at arm's length to study my face. "But you have your mother's eyes. He talked about both of you often." We went to her office. A small but comfortable space filled with family photos and the scent of coffee. She offered me a seat and poured me a cup from a carafe that looked like it had been brewing since dawn. "Before we handle the legal matters," she said, settling behind her desk, "I want you to understand what your father did for you, and why." She opened a thick file folder that had my name on the tab. Inside were copies of deposit slips going back more than 2 decades. Small amounts at first, 25, 50, sometimes just 10. The amounts grew larger but remained modest, 100, 200, occasionally 500. "He brought me his first deposit when you were 4 years old," Elena explained. "It was 150, his entire tax refund that year. He said he wanted to start a fund for his daughter's future, something that would grow slowly but steadily. Something that would be there when you needed it most." I ran my finger down the list of deposits. The dates told a story of sacrifice I'd never known about. Deposits made during Christmas weeks, probably money that could have been spent on better presents. Deposits made during months when I remembered him seeming worried about bills. Deposits made even during the worst periods of his illness, when he barely had the strength to leave the house. "He never missed a month," Elena continued. "Even when it was just $25, even when he was in the hospital, he would have me come to his bedside to make the deposits, insisting that this was more important than any medical bill." The investment statements showed the careful growth of the fund. Conservative investments, nothing risky, but steady and patient. My father had been playing a long game, betting on compound interest and time to create something meaningful for my future. "Why you?" I asked. "I don't mean to be rude, but why did he trust you with this?" Elena smiled, and I saw genuine warmth there, the kind of affection that develops over decades of friendship. "I helped him set up his first business account, when he was just starting his contracting company. We became friends over the years, good friends. He talked about you constantly, worried about you, wanted the best for you. When your mother got sick, he was terrified that something would happen to him too, and you'd be left with nothing." She pulled out another folder, thicker than the first. "This is the real reason he trusted me. I lost my own daughter when she was 16. Car accident. Your father was the contractor who donated his time to build the memorial garden at her school. We understood each other's love for our daughters, the fierce need to protect them even when we can't be there." I felt tears threatening again, but Elena continued gently. "He never got over losing your mother, Diana. But he also never stopped planning for your future. This account was his way of making sure that no matter what happened to him, you would have choices, real choices, not just enough to get by, but enough to build something meaningful." She handed me a single piece of paper, an account statement dated just 1 week before my father's death. The balance made me dizzy. "The 8047 326 by 1 Sue, it's all yours," she said simply. "No string conditions, no probate court. Your father set this up as a payable, on death account with you as the sole beneficiary. All we need is your signature and identification, and you can access it immediately." I stared at the number, trying to make sense of what it meant. This wasn't just money, it was freedom. It was the ability to go back to school if I wanted to start a business, to travel, to take time to figure out who I was beyond the role of caregiver. It was my father's final gift, more precious than any house or business account. "There's one more thing," Elena said. Reaching into her desk drawer, she pulled out a sealed envelope with my name on it in my father's handwriting. He gave this to me last month. When he realized he didn't have much time left, he made me promise to give it to you after we'd handled the account business. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in his careful script, though the handwriting was weaker than in the earlier note. My beautiful daughter, if Elena is reading this with you, it means you now know the secret I kept for so long. I hope you can forgive an old man for his deception. But I needed you to discover your strength before you discovered your safety net. I had to pause, overwhelmed by the sound of his voice in the words. Stella will get the house and the business accounts, and that's as it should be. She worked hard to build her career, and those assets will help her maintain the lifestyle she's chosen. But you, my darling girl, you chose love over ambition, sacrifice over self-interest. You chose to stay with me when you could have been building your own life. And that choice meant more to me than I could ever express while I was alive. The letter continued. This money isn't just a gift. It's restitution for all the opportunities you gave up to care for me. It's compensation for the education you postponed, the relationships you didn't pursue, the dreams you set aside because I needed you. Take it and do something extraordinary with your life. Not because you owe me anything, but because you owe yourself everything. At the bottom, he'd written, P.S. Elena has been like a second mother to me all these years, watching over this account like it was her own child's future. Trust her. She loves you almost as much as I do. I signed the papers through a blur of tears, officially claiming an inheritance I'd never known existed. Elena hugged me again as we finished the paperwork, and I realized I wasn't just gaining access to money. I was gaining a relationship with someone who had loved my father, and by extension, had been caring about my future for decades. As I drove home, my mind was spinning with possibilities. I could pay off my father's medical debts, the ones that had been weighing on my conscience. I could take time to grieve properly instead of rushing into survival mode. I could go back to school and finish my degree. I could travel, maybe visit the places my father had always talked about seeing, but never had the chance to explore. But first, I had a half-sister to face. And for the first time in my life, I would be facing her as an equal. I found Stella in the kitchen, sorting through my father's coffee mugs with the cold efficiency of someone conducting an inventory. She looked up when I entered, and I saw surprise flicker across her face. I wasn't wearing the defeated expression she'd probably expected. I wasn't moving with the hunched shoulders of someone who'd given up. I didn't expect you back so soon, she said, setting down a mug that read, World's Greatest Dad. I noticed she'd placed it in the donate pile. I thought you'd spend the day apartment hunting. I had some business to take care of first, I said, taking a seat at the kitchen table where we'd had so many family meals. Back when we were still pretending to be a happy blended family. Something in my tone must have alerted her, because she gave me her full attention for the first time since the funeral. What kind of business? I pulled Elena's business card from my purse and placed it on the table between us. The kind that involves First National Trust, and an account that's been growing for 23 years. The color drained from Stella's face. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the real inheritance, Stella. The one Dad actually wanted me to have. I watched her process this information, seeing her lawyer's mind working through the implications. That's impossible. The will was clear. I have copies of all his financial statements. You have copies of his obvious accounts. I corrected. The ones he wanted you to see. But this one existed long before you started helping him with his finances. Long before he got sick. Long before anyone could question his mental capacity or claim undue influence. I told her about the hidden compartment, about Elena, about the decades of careful planning our father had done to ensure my future. With each detail, I watched Stella's confidence crumble and her anger build. This is ridiculous, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Even if such an account exists, it should be part of the estate. It should be split between us. Actually, it shouldn't, I said calmly. Payable, on death accounts exist outside of probate. They're not part of the estate. They're separate property that transfers directly to the named beneficiary. Stella's face was red now, the careful composure she'd maintained since the funeral finally cracking. This is exactly what I was afraid of, she said, her voice rising. You manipulated him. You spent 2 years filling his head with guilt about how much you were sacrificing, making him feel like he owed you something. Her accusation should have hurt me, but instead it felt hollow. I thought of Elena's office, of the decades of deposit slips, of the photograph taken when I was too young to manipulate anyone. Stella, I said quietly, this account was opened when I was 4 years old. What exactly do you think I was manipulating him about when I was in preschool? She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. I could see her mind working, trying to find a different angle of attack. Fine, she said finally. Maybe the account is legitimate. But you can't just walk away from this family obligation. The house still needs to be sold, Dad's affairs still need to be settled. You can't just take your money and disappear. Actually, I can, I said. That's what financial independence means, Stella. It means I have choices now. I can choose to help you with the estate settlement, or I can choose to let you handle it yourself since you're the executor and primary beneficiary. I stood up, smoothing down my business suit. I can choose to forgive the years of subtle insults and condescension, or I can choose to remember exactly how you've treated me since we were children. I can choose to maintain a relationship with you going forward, or I can choose to build a new life that doesn't include people who see my kindness as weakness. Stella stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. You can't be serious. We're family, I asked. Because family supports each other, family appreciates sacrifice. Family doesn't try to convince someone that their love was manipulation or their caregiving was selfishness. I walked to the counter and picked up the world's greatest dad mug from her donate pile. I'll be taking this, I said, and a few other things that actually matter to me. You can have everything else. As I moved toward the door, Stella's voice stopped me. Deanna, wait. For the first time, she sounded uncertain, almost vulnerable. I didn't mean, look, I know I haven't always been the easiest person to get along with, but we're all the family each other has left. I turned back to face her. She looked smaller somehow, less formidable than she had just minutes before. You're right, I said. We are all the family each other has left, but family is supposed to be built on love and respect, not obligation and guilt. For 23 years, Dad was building something for my future, because he believed I deserved better than what I had. Maybe it's time I started believing that too. I left her standing in the kitchen, holding an inventory list for a house that suddenly felt much less valuable than she'd thought. I had 6 days left to pack my belongings, but now those 6 days felt like a gift rather than a deadline. I was packing for an adventure, not a defeat. That evening, I called Elena to thank her again, and to ask about investment advisors. I wanted to be smart with this gift my father had given me, to honor his careful planning with equally careful decision making about my future. Before you make any big decisions, she said, take some time to grieve properly. Not just for your father, but for the life you put on hold to care for him. You need to figure out who Diana is when she's not defined by someone else's needs. It was good advice. I spent the next few weeks, in a furnished apartment across town, sleeping late for the first time in years, reading books I'd forgotten I loved, and slowly beginning to imagine what I wanted my life to look like. I did go back to school, eventually. I finished my degree in social work, specializing in elder care advocacy. I started a nonprofit organization that helps families navigate the complex world of caring for aging parents, making sure they know about resources I'd never heard of when I was struggling alone. I bought a small house with a garden, where I grow vegetables my father would have appreciated. I travel occasionally, always thinking of him, when I see something beautiful, wishing I could share it with him. And I maintain a relationship with Stella, though it's different now. More honest, maybe. Less weighted by old patterns of dominance and submission. She's still my half-sister, still the only person who shares my childhood memories. But she's not the center of my universe anymore. She's just one person in a life that has room for many people now. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd never found that hidden compartment, if I'd accepted Stella's version of events, and disappeared into poverty and obscurity. The thought makes me grateful not just for my father's money, but for his faith in me. He knew that someday I would need to know my own worth, and he made sure I'd have the means to discover it. The greatest inheritance he left me wasn't money at all. It was the knowledge that I was loved deeply, consistently. and unconditionally by someone who saw my value, even when I couldn't see it myself. That's worth more than any bank account, though having the bank account certainly makes life easier. I keep the wooden jewelry box on my dresser now, in my own house. Sometimes I run my fingers over the hidden panel, remembering the moment my life changed forever. It reminds me that love sometimes wears disguises, that the people who care about us most don't always show it in ways we expect, and that the most precious gifts often come wrapped in the most ordinary packages. My father taught me to make pancakes, to change a tire, and to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. But the most important thing he taught me was that I deserved a life as big and full and wonderful as I could make it. It just took me a little while to learn that lesson. Did you like this story? Tell us in the comments which city you're listening from. If you enjoyed this dramatic tale of betrayal and resurrection, please support us with a super thanks, so we can continue bringing you more incredible life stories like this one. Thank you so much for your support. We look forward to your comments about Diana's amazing journey. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that we highly recommend. There's so much more content on our channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story, with love and respect.